Our next guest is Jean Lambert, and Jean was a MEP in London for 2 decades. She was one of the first Green Party MEPs elected at the same time as Caroline Lucas in 1999, and she also worked for nearly a decade alongside Keith Taylor in the European Parliament. Keith Taylor was a Green Party MEP for the southeast of England, and also a councillor, and had a number of other roles within the Green Party. He sadly passed away very recently, and we invited Jean on today to talk a little bit about the life and legacy of her friend and colleague, Keith Taylor, and share that with you all today. So thank you very, very much for joining us today, Jean. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you're among one of the people who worked the closest with Keith over his political career. How was Keith as a colleague for you in the European Parliament?
Thinking about this, and I think the first word came to mind, but actually was fun. That we obviously did a lot of very serious work in the European Parliament, as members there, and of course with our constituencies, with the party, NGOs, but fun. That if you were talking to Keith, there would be a joke somewhere in there, and even when we were sort of discussing really quite serious stuff, you never lost that sort of, I don't know, that sort of human element, that somebody who, even on the smallest things, who would notice, sort of people's new haircuts, new hair colours, whatever. Somebody who really, you got the feeling really enjoyed being with people and also sort of working for people. So I think that sort of, that warmth, that personality, that humanity, I think, what I remember most strongly. And I think a lot of people would say he was a team player. He had a really good team of staff around him. I think all of us know that as an elected representative, if you're lucky enough to have staff, you're as good as the staff you've got. They're the ones that actually make ideas happen, make things happen. They produce the reports. Keith had a good team who were really happy working for him, and it's interesting how many of them at the Brussels end are still working with the Green Group in some way or another as professional advisors. So that sort of work that they were doing in Keith's office, the depth of that and the detail there, I think, has really sort of carried through. So I think that also says something about him as an MP and effectively a politician in that sort of close relationship with his staff.
It's really lovely to hear the kind of reflections about Keith, and I think a lot of people, I think, were hit quite hard by hearing of Keith's passing. For me, I joined the Green Party in 2010. He'd just become an MEP, and he was a major fixture of every Green Party conference. We'd see Jean and Keith with the MEPs for breakfast. We'd see his work within the European Parliament being one of the kind of the main successes and achievements of the Green Party of England and Wales. We'd had elected representation in the European Parliament for many years. Obviously, we no longer have that privilege, no longer being in the European Union. But Keith was there in the European Parliament for a decade, nearly a decade, and obviously he would have influenced and impacted on lots of pan-European legislation through his role as an MEP. What do you think some of his biggest achievements were within the European Parliament?
Well, there are two ways, in the sense that you have power in the European Parliament. One is the direct work that you actually do on legislation, and the other is the influence that you have. And that influence is within the Parliament itself, but also sort of within the wider community and the wider constituency. And I think part of one of the things that Keith was able to do was actually to really link that if you look at some of the things that he himself sort of talks about being proudest of, and there's a book that we did, I'll do an advert, at the end of our legislative period, which was, yes, the Greens for a Better Europe, absolutely. If you look at Keith's chapter within that, and the book was his idea, he wanted to have something substantial to leave, to show the mark that, in the sense that we'd made as Greens with from the UK within the European Parliament. There are pieces of legislation, for example, that I think one of those that he was proudest of was, which, I mean, sounds ridiculous in the sense of why on earth was this even an argument, was about the amount of sugar that you could actually put in baby food. Where there was a real push from the industry back in about sort of 2016 to change the sort of figures in a piece of legislation going through to actually increase the amount of permitted sugar. And Keith, as somebody who was very concerned about obesity, about child health, about food quality, really sort of led, as it were, the sort of campaign within the Parliament and the legislative change in the Parliament to resist that increase. And so I think that's something which it seems very small, but of course has really quite an impact on the lives of so many children and their future development. So that would be one area. Work that he did on the sort of car emissions, clean air. Clean air was an absolute passion for Keith. Again, one of the reports that he did with the money that we're fortunate enough to have had as members of the European Parliament to produce reports, to produce information. For him, quite a lot of that was about clean air, air quality, and again, what it does to people's health. And as we know, the impact that has, again, particularly on children and lung development. So the work that he did on that, work that he did as well on disability access, and the wider issues around access to mobility, access to travel. So the Accessibility Act was one of the last things that was coming through as part of the equalities legislation of the European Parliament. And again, Keith was very active, Group's rapporteur in the shadow in the Transport Committee on that, in terms of making sure that mobility was accessible to all, that it's affordable, but particularly about the disability access dimension of it. So those are some of the things. And again, through the influence, he was very active as the vice chair of the cross-party group on animal rights, animal welfare. And there, he was a real champion in the sort of campaigning work, the legislative work being done in Parliament on the banning of cages for chickens, most recently for rabbits. That's a big industry in parts of the European Union, to improve the quality of the way in which animals are treated. And of course, domestically, did a lot on campaigning against live animal transport, because that's a particular issue for, his constituency in the southeast of England. So there's a longer list, but that's some headlines.
There is a huge list, and I'd love to go into a little bit more detail on some of it. But before I put another question to you, I just wanted to, for people watching, please do pop questions for Jean in the chat on YouTube. I'd love to hear also your comments and reflections on Keith's time as an MEP and also his wider work in politics and the Green Party. Now, you mentioned, Jean, that book, Greens for a Better Europe, and I recently reread Keith's chapter in it the other week, and it is an amazing read to hear his journey in politics, but also the kinds of his assessment of what makes a good politician, of how to be effective, and also the kind of impacts that he's had. And I was also coincidentally a couple of days ago, I was in the Oxford City Council Green Group room clearing out a bunch of old leaflets and stuff that had been in there for forever and we needed to clear out. And I found, half a dozen reports that Keith had produced as an MEP on everything from energy, from animal rights, and so on. And a huge body of work that he did during his time in the European Parliament that's really influential, impactful. But he also was a major figure within the Green Party of England and Wales for many years outside of the European Parliament. Now, I've said that I think that Keith is probably one of the most important figures in the Green Party's history for a number of reasons. So he was one of the first Green councillors in Brighton and Hove. When he joined the Green Group in Brighton Hove, it was a group of three, and when he left office as a councillor to join the European Parliament, the following year the Greens took control of the council, which shows you the scale of growth over that period. He also did a stint as principal speaker, which for those who've been around the Green Party for a while, is the kind of precursor to the leader that we have today. And he was the Green Party's parliamentary candidate in Brighton Pavilion in 2005, when he received the then highest share of the vote for any parliamentary candidate for the Green Party ever, before Caroline Lucas went on and took the seat in 2010. So obviously he had a huge role in the Green Party over many years. What do you think his impact has been on the Green Party itself?
I would agree that there's a considerable impact, and particularly I think in that period of growth, with the work that he did in Brighton. I mean, he would say that it wasn't just him, but he was certainly part of that work that's done. Which, for the Greens, I think that what has happened in Brighton over the years, I mean, it has been immeasurably, it has really been important for us, because apart from anything else, it's shown that even with the electoral system we have, it's possible to get elected, that it's possible to get elected to that point where you can actually take control and be there as a minority group. So none of the question about sort of having been in an administration for a while and learning, it was real sort of learning on the job. And I think therefore that, Brighton has been almost a sort of, how can you phrase it, almost a sort of political learning lab for us. At times, I think, people in Brighton, Brighton Green Party themselves might have had their heads in their hands, but for a lot of the time, it's been really powerful to see them come back and be in there again as a minority administration. I think is amazing and really important for us. And therefore, the role that you have as somebody like Keith in helping to build that credibility, to build that relationship with your electorate, that makes people feel that they can really trust you and trust you to deliver, and that you're able to speak to them in a way that they understand and feel your passion for actually making the place better, and that it's not about you and your role and your position or whatever, but it really is about actually making life better for the people who live there, I think has been really important. And Keith being there as one of those sort of building blocks and showing how we can actually develop as a party, develop electoral success, gain that confidence of voters, I think has been absolutely really important and critical for us in helping, I think, the party to survive some very difficult periods, and to show that you really can develop, and that there is an electoral path for us, not only an electoral, but that is really important. People can trust you and that you can deliver even in some of the most difficult circumstances. And I think having that real grounding in the local authority also meant that when he was there at the European Parliament, he also still had that connection back with Green councillors and helping that to grow. And of course, following the work that Caroline had done in the constituency, to be out there across the region. And in that sense, South East, different to London, which has its own sort of elected level. But for the South East, you're the one Green regional representative. And therefore, you have to make that count. And so, as I say, a lot of the work that he did on anti-fracking campaigns, on social issues around the horrendous rise of food banks, as well as the clean air, the animal welfare, all these sorts of things, I think showed people that Greens really did have a breadth of vision and were prepared to stick with something and to deliver. So I think he's been really important for the Green Party's development.
Couldn't agree with that more. And we've got some lovely messages that have come through on the chat. So Finn has said that after hearing that Keith had passed away, they came across a video of Keith promoting LGBT Pride Month, and was really lovely to see that. And so Keith was obviously a huge advocate for human rights, for both domestically and internationally. I wondered if you had any reflections on his work on human rights issues.
Well, yes, and I mean, in fact, sort of being there on Pride, some of those pictures and so on are wonderful. He was did, I think, like a party with a purpose, and that in terms of the human rights issues, where he was on the development committee for a while and did, led on an opinion from that committee on the issues about the impact of the financial crisis on the world's poorest. He was at the UN as part of a Parliament delegation to make some of those points as well. In terms of decent, equitable, fair development, and of course was a very strong supporter of the Palestinian cause, and had been to Gaza. He was a long-standing member of the Palestine delegation within the European Parliament. So in terms of issues around diversity, equality, and international equality and solidarity, again, a lot of work there and a real burning passion for that you could really hear when he spoke about it. If you look at some of his speeches from the Parliament, and all of them are, recorded in script, even if you can't see the films. That when you look at that, even within a minute, he had the ability, which was all we're allowed, were still allowed in the European Parliament a lot of the time. You can still pack a punch in a minute if it's there with passion and you've got a clear message, and that was Keith. He thought very carefully about what he said in the Parliament to make sure that every second that he had really counted in terms of delivering the passion and the message that he had. So an effective communicator there as well.
So finally, before I let you go, Jean, I wondered if you could share what your favourite memory of Keith was.
Oh.
Sorry to put you on the spot. I know it's a big one.
yeah, the memory that you want to leave in other people's heads, not just your own. I think it would be probably, it sounds bizarre, but Strasbourg, he had a hotel that he stayed at regularly, which had a very good restaurant. Those who know Keith know that he loved cooking, really appreciated sort of, the effort that went into that. And being there at dinner with him, it was a hotel that a lot of other parliamentarians stayed at. And always if you had dinner with him, it was never just you. There were always conversations with everybody else who would be coming in and out, because he was always open to talking to people just about, any of the political groups from the UK, any of the politicians, always happy to see them, to talk to them, hear what they were saying. And they were always happy to talk to Keith. So that sort of convivial dinner, but with a political brain working the whole time, I cherish those. I cherish those as a memory, and I will miss them.
Thank you so much, Jean, for sharing so much about Keith's life and legacy, and the political impacts, and also the personal elements of your relationship with what was, I'm sure, a great colleague and friend. Our thoughts at Bright Green obviously go out to Keith's friends and family. It's a huge loss to the Green movement, but hopefully we can continue to remember and honour the legacy of Keith and continue the journey that he took the Green Party on. But thanks so much for joining us today, Jean.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you.